Welcome everybody to the Policy Development Strategic Direction Committee, September 13th, 2022. We have quorum, I believe, and John Pierce has indicated he will probably be late coming in, so we look forward to him coming. You've taken attendance? Okay. Do we have approval for the agenda today? Moved by Councillor Chambers and seconded by Councillor Miller. Actually, Councillor Coleman. Thanks. All in favor? Okay, passed. Yeah. So we have any declarations of pecuniary interests? Okay. Seeing none. We have adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting. Moved by Councillor Ferry, seconded by Mayor Bailey. All those in favor? Passed. Okay. Business arising from the minutes. Do we have any? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to the CAO's update from last July, and talking about possible MTO delegation regarding the automated speed enforcement. We did have a delegation. That delegation went well. Not quite sure what the outcome is going to be, but they seem to receive as well. And then we also had a delegation on the paramedics, ambulance wait times, offloads, all that. So, and as you well know, just shortly after the county delegation, the province took action on it. So I like to credit Cindy for that. So. But just want to say that they went well. Thank you.
Okay. Any other business arising from the minutes? Okay. Thank you. Consent items 7.1 and 7.2. There's nothing. Yeah. Okay. Staff reports. 8.1 RPT 26722 small scale on-farm business subclass. C. Staley. Heather, would you like to? Oh, yeah. And seconded by Councillor Chambers. Okay. Any comments or questions? Okay. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, just I guess one comment, one question. It's good to see this. Obviously, it's been an issue for a long time. I remember we talked about the cherry picking place and the work they did. Obviously, corn drying is also something I think that this affects. I could be wrong. But in the report, it says, quote, the business must be an extension of the farming operation. Does that mean that 100% of the product has to come from the farm, or does it mean more than 50%? It doesn't explain that, and I'm not quite sure.
Heather, can you comment on that?
It's my understanding that it's that 50 to 100,000 value of the property must be related to the farm operations. So for the first 0 to 49,000, like if your farm-related business has that much value, you already get it. This is for the second portion, 50 to 100,000. So it'd be like 100% of that 50 to 100,000, but the rest of your property wouldn't have to be farm-related, just that much assessment.
Follow up? No? Okay. Any other questions for Heather? Okay. We have a mover and a seconder. All in favor? Passed. Okay. 8.2 RPT 29822 nuisance odor and lighting bylaw. Greg Bergeron. We have a recommendation. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Mayor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Laferriere. Do we have some questions for Greg? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. So I'm happy to see this, prepared to support it at the right time. My question for staff, for Greg, is this sounds like it steps in the right direction to solve or deal with issues related to nuisance odors specific to cannabis production. My question is, we have parts of the county where there are other potential nuisance odors related to industrial facilities. And I'm wondering, is there an opportunity in the future to take a similar approach to those kinds of issues? I know that there are residents who have concerns in that direction. Thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor House, that's an excellent question, Councillor House, and that is something that was discussed at the staff level. And the consensus was that there's some existing legislation to deal with industries, like commercial industries and industrial facilities through the Ministry of the Environment and the environmental, the EPA, Environmental Protection Act. So it is covered under those regulations. There's also some outlets for complainants to deal with OMAFRA or the Normal Farm Practices Board, as indicated in the report. So we decided that we were just going to focus on the one problem here that's kind of been plaguing the county for the last couple of years, and that was a decision that was taken by staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up. Thanks, Greg. Perhaps we can revisit this discussion a little bit sometime in the future. I do know that some residents who have neighboring industrial facilities with odor issues, I think they understand the EPA and the ministry process, but I think they also at the same time are looking for support from their municipality. So we can perhaps revisit that at an appropriate time. Thank you.
Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, perhaps to Greg, perhaps to our CAO as well. There was an interesting article in the Hamilton Spectator about bylaws, and they concluded that bylaws do not enforce themselves. I'm just wondering if you want to speak a little bit to how you see the enforcement of this bylaw being carried out, because there may be some complications. So, as the Spectator said, bylaws don't enforce themselves.
Greg?
Yes, certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Chambers. Yeah, we agree. I mean, we would have to, deploy the appropriate staff and have staff trained to make sure that we were responding to complaints. But our process right now is that we are generally complaint generated unless there are some matters of public safety, and that would be the intent with this bylaw as well. But certainly, based on the parameters that are in the bylaw, it would take an effort over a period of time for us to establish violations and get to a point where we would want to have the offenders mitigate through air treatment. So it's definitely something that's on our radar, and I think once we start getting complaints from residents, we will certainly respond appropriately.
Councillor Gatward.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the CAO wanted to make some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just hold on for a second, Joan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Further to that, I would echo Greg's comments, but I also note, I think that two positive things we've done in this approach. We did a pilot, so we could, before we just passed a bylaw and then figured out whether we could enforce it. We did a pilot. I think that made a lot of sense. We tested it out. Okay, there's some learning to do. There's some equipment to get. So I think we've approached that the right way by trying it out before we brought the bylaw in. I think the second thing is council has been adding resources to bylaw enforcement for the last several years because it's reflective of the increasing number of calls, both increasing of population, but also the increasing number of calls. So, I think we have the right makeup of testing things before we just jump into them, as well as making sure we've got enough staff resources to enforce these bylaws. As you suggest, they're not going to enforce themselves.
Thank you, Michael. Joan Gatward, Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My comment and question is through you to Greg. Greg, during the pilot, I know that staff was out with their odor detecting equipment and recorded levels of nuisance. And we still have that equipment, correct? So that we can use it on complaints?
Through the chair to Councillor Gowards, yes, that's correct. We still have that equipment, and if we are to proceed with this bylaw, we would have to calibrate and potentially have another staff member trained, and that's why we are recommending that it is enacted in the new year.
And I'm happy to see this, and I think some of these cannabis operations I've heard have closed down and haven't been as successful as perhaps they thought they might be. I'm wondering about the one on Jerseyville Road. Did it close?
We're not 100% certain. I know that we're not getting the frequency of calls for specific areas in the county that have been problematic in the past. So we haven't verified that information. We have verified a couple of other locations that are either in the process of being sold or have been sold.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am appreciative of Greg and his staff for bringing this forward. The odors from cannabis have a very, very real negative impact on our citizens. You visit people, they've been there for 20 years, they sit on their deck, they have people over, and then all of a sudden they can't sit on their deck anymore. They got to go inside because this waft of skunk-like odors comes. It's so frustrating. And there's, as a counselor, there was just nothing you could do for them. You go to a MAFRA, you go to the federal government, and it's everybody knows it's been a big fight for the last 4, 5, 6 years. I'm not saying this will solve it. It's good to see. 2 questions through you, Mr. Chair, to Greg. First question is, why are we approving this in principle? Why aren't we just approving it?
Through the chair, we are approving this in principle because we are still working with the consultant, and this is basically the first cut for the quantifiable language. I've had one follow-up conversation with the consultant who's extremely busy. He's in high demand. And we've had some discussion about what we may want to see in the bylaw in the future. We're discussing some of the numbers. I require a better knowledge of what these numbers mean, and a better understanding of how that's going to impact what we do when we do investigate these complaints. So it is a work in progress. The principle in itself is that we will use some of the parameters in the bylaw basically to issue orders so that we can get some more appropriate testing, some more accurate testing, and use those parameters as basically the final number to determine if air treatment is warranted or not.
Okay, but just because
and also the scope is it's very scoped, right? This bylaw is to deal with one very specific problem.
Okay, but just because if we approve it in principle, it still goes into effect, yes?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. Some of the language may change a little bit, but in principle, I think that this is what we're moving forward with.
Okay, second question, Mr. Chair. I actually got an answer to this, but I just want to confirm. Actually, Councillor Gatward kind of touched on it. I don't think she knows she did. But this new bylaw, keep in mind, applies only to new cannabis producers that come along, not to existing ones, correct? You mentioned that in the report. The existing ones don't fall under this bylaw because they are legally non-conforming. I think we all understand that. But what I want to confirm through you tonight is that if an existing cannabis operation is sold, that legal non-conforming status goes with the property. In other words, the new owners don't have to abide by the new bylaw. Is that correct?
Through the chair, just to correct just the perception of this bylaw. This bylaw would be applicable to the ones that hold legal non-conforming status through zoning. So right now we're getting some success with the zoning bylaw because we made amendments in November of 2020 that essentially captured facilities that are operating under the ACMPR regime. So this bylaw would certainly capture these individuals who hold legal non-conforming status under zoning. So it would be applicable to them, and they would have to essentially abide by this bylaw.
Okay, if I get a complaint, I'm calling you, Greg. Thank you.
Any other questions for Greg? Okay, well, we have a mover and we have a seconder. All those in favor? Okay, passed. Okay. RPT 030922, proposed housekeeping amendment to noise control bylaw 185 as amended. So we have a recommendation here. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Mayor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Weed. Okay. Do we have any questions? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Also happy to see some movement in this direction. My question is, it gets into a little bit of the technicality of some of these vehicles, motorcycles, trucks, hot rods, whatever, are by nature, they're loudest when they're accelerating, right? So somebody with any vehicle can be idling on the side of the curb, and it's a reasonable sound. But if they decide to floor it when they're going up Grenover Street, North Hill, it can turn into a very large sound, and that's where we get the complaints. Is there, and I know it's difficult, but is there any opportunity for enforcement of the vehicle in motion? I realize the sound testing device is presumably deployed while the car is just idling at the curb, and it's not going to necessarily cross the line into a punishable offense. Any thoughts on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor House. So we did actually look at that. There are several other municipalities that have tried to address that issue. It does become, oh, can you hear me? Okay. It does become a bit difficult just because of logistics and how the test would be conducted. That is something that it could be explored further down the road through the assistance of potentially an expert or someone who would be able to utilize the proper sound level equipment to be able to do that mid-drive sort of testing. But as it stands, in our discussions with some other municipalities, that is quite difficult to do, and often the resolution is that to stop the vehicle and then potentially have the vehicle sped up to a certain RPM to be able to mimic that. But in the research that we've conducted and in looking at other municipalities, that is still quite a difficult thing to replicate even when stopped. So it could be considered, but at this moment it's a little bit difficult to kind of address, just because, as you'd mentioned, there are so many things going on, and there's the issue of ambient sound levels. So it would prove difficult, and that may be something that may need to be explored with the assistance of an expert, since this can get quite technical.
Thank you, and this is another topic where we do get complaints. I'm sure most of the people here have had complaints from residents about this. I'm happy to hear that it's on your radar, so to speak, to all of the variables involved. So thanks.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Oh, Councillor Bell?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rochelle. My question is very similar to that of Councillor Howes. I had a complaint from a resident in Southwest Paris earlier this week about two very noisy motorcycles. And of course, for them it's transient. The noise is there and then it's gone, but the damage is done once the noise is there. If they were to capture the plate of the vehicle or the motorcycle, can they pass it to bylaw or to OPP and have them follow it up, or is it just not applicable?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Bell. Yes, I think that would, that's been addressed in the report. I do think that would be the appropriate measure. If a resident has a complaint, the best thing to do would be to record the license plates so that it could be followed up with ideally OPP, because OPP are the ones that have the jurisdiction under the Highway Traffic Act to stop moving vehicles. So if they were to go out and find that vehicle, they could stop it and employ the sound testing. The other option here that we sort of incorporated into the bylaw to assist is the definition of the effective muffling device, because we understand that doing the testing midway would be, or finding the vehicle and stopping it would be difficult, but the use of the effective muffling device, that definition, it's sort of to act as a gatekeeper, so that if a vehicle was found that the sound was quite loud, we could use the provisions of the effective muffling device to get a violation that way, to sort of show that the vehicle is in violation because the muffling device is enhancing the sound, not so much muffling. But this would be done through cooperation with OPP and having the complaint received by them and them going out. Logistically, it still would be a little difficult, but that would be the way it would be managed.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. I think it would be helpful to us as council to have some statistics about how frequently and how successfully the OPP do actually follow up on this. I feel like I'm saying to my residents, yes, the OPP will follow up, and then it kind of goes into a black hole. I'd like to have some clarity about that, and perhaps it could be reported in the monthly Police Services Board update to us. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for asking a very similar question to the previous two questions, but I'll put a little different spin on it, I guess. People with loud vehicles, excessively loud vehicles, live somewhere. Chances are they live beside somebody else, somebody who doesn't like it. Okay, so somebody calls me. They know their neighbor needs a new muffler, so they got a very loud vehicle. For the OPP to lay a charge, they don't necessarily have to hear the vehicle in motion traveling on a public road, or do they?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor. Sorry, I just wanted to understand the question. So if, are we asking if the vehicle was heard on private property?
No. Let's just say Monday to Friday, the neighbor drives out their vehicle to work. They're missing a muffler. It's really loud. So the neighbor calls the OPP. Now, does the OPP have to hear that vehicle on a public road to lay a charge? Or say they go to the residence, the vehicle's there. How does that process work is what I'm asking.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So for the OPP, they would, according to the Highway Traffic Act, they would be able to stop vehicles on the highway, but we have also in the bylaw, we have the municipal law enforcement officers who are able to enforce the bylaw as well. The assumption would be that both groups would be trained in the use of the sound level meter, so that for potentially vehicles that are not on a highway or they're on private property, or they've been stopped after and the complaint was received, a municipal officer could go out and test the vehicle if that was the way the complaint was received. So it wasn't heard in motion at the time.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does this also include jake breaks?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I didn't hear the question.
Does this also include Jake bricks?
Mr. Chair, so it's an air brake
Air brake.
on a truck.
On a truck? Oh. Okay.
Engine brakes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Coleman. So for this specific change, it was with respect solely to the mufflers, and theirs being able to sort of enhance the sound of the engine and not muffle it. So I'm not entirely sure if this would be applicable to the air brake, but if it would be, such that it would increase the sound to the engine, then there could potentially be a violation with the muffler not being effective.
Okay, any further questions? Okay. Seeing none, we have a mover, we have a seconder, all in favor? Okay. It is passed. 8.4 RPT 024222 Athlete Recognition Policy. We have a recommendation. Do we have a mover and a second? Moved by Councillor Chambers, second by Councillor Miller. Okay. Any questions? Councillor Chambers.
Just that I understand the policy, it's not allowed to put banners or signs on our village signs, but it is okay if the owner of a welcome to sign, like a service club, wants to, they can. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct.
So if someone wants to put a sign up on a service club, they have to work with the service club in order to do that. And there's no sense coming to the county to ask for a banner to be put on one of our nice new village signs, because that would be contrary to the policy.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? No, seeing none. We have a mover, we have a seconder, all in favor? Okay, pass. RPT 031122 Federal Electoral Redistricting Commission Proposal. Adam Crozier. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Coleman, second by Councillor Miller. And do we have some questions? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Adam, or maybe a suggestion. So I've talked to a few people who have been alarmed by this subject, but not directly alarmed with the topic of hand. There are people who are misinterpreting this as the municipality would divide up. And I'm just wondering, whatever we decide to do with this, whatever the direction is given, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to do an information brief through our communications department to clarify for people exactly what this means, and how it does not mean that part of Paris ends up being annexed to Oxford, and it just to clarify things for people. Okay. Sure. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Through you to Adam. So Adam, I know the last two times this was done, the final recommendation really didn't end up looking like the first two recommendations. So this isn't final. The one thing that's always struck me about this is, the problem is the problem of the donut, right? We're this donut around another community. And I always thought, something that might make sense is something more like a Brant North and a Brant South, where it's a dividing line for Brantford, but it's also a dividing line for the county in terms of that representation. I think also what a lot of folks don't realize, and I will get to my question, what a lot of folks don't realize is that we already do have 3 members, right, within the county. And I know Councillor Chambers brings it up all the time when we're saying we need to bring, letters to X, Y, and Z and not just X, as we may have been used to in the past. I'm wondering if maybe that communication Councillor House talked about could also give a bit of an accurate description of what we currently have, that currently the county has also. I like the idea of saying what it is, but also what it's not, but we already do have some split. I just wonder if that north and south, like, if that would actually be better to have, you know, 2 reps instead of 3, but one is our main rep and then 2 others are, you know, for this, that, and the other. It becomes a very tough dividing line when it's the edges peeled off. And I understand why that happened previously. What people don't also maybe understand is that, and saying this as somebody who ran twice federally, you know, for a long time there, Brantford Brant was and still is the largest riding in the country in terms of population. So this becomes kind of another. I don't see a way that we can stay as one riding, but the fact is, right now we're 3, and would it make more sense to be 2? Again, maybe that's a little more rhetorical, but if you have any comments, please, I'd love to hear them.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you're absolutely right about it being the largest one. I believe it's. I read the report, and it's 24.69% from the deviating from the quota in the 2011 system. So yeah, it's definitely one of the largest, and because of that, it's been difficult to keep it together. Sort of cycling through your comments and questions. Being a part of the 2012 proposal a little bit. Yeah, at one point, I believe during the second proposal, we were split into 4 ridings. They took a concession out in the east end of the county into a Hamilton riding. And then the first proposal split north and south at the 403, similar, I guess, to what you just suggested. So, but that wasn't taken well either. So, you know, obviously, I've noted in the report there are several options if council wishes to get into, you know, a little bit more in depth into the proposal to identify any potential solutions. And council can do that as a whole. Individual members of council can do that representing their constituents individually. That's personal preference. But, you know, those are some of the things to consider. And, you know, obviously getting difficult when the riding, the population of the 2 municipalities is so large that it becomes difficult. And the commission's, you know, intent is really to go for, you know, equal representation. And at the end of the day, they end up really deconstructing a lot of ridings like Brantford Brant, which is 24.5% over the deviation and right up to the upper limit. I mean, I think they must have been picking pieces of the county out just to make it fit. So,
I also, just as a follow-up, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but I think the average parliamentarian in Canada is elected with something like 12,000 votes. I came in 3rd and I had 16,000, right? Like, it's interesting that, you know, I know people who get elected here, they go in with some of the biggest votes in the country in terms of actual raw vote. So it also becomes a representation issue. So, you know, it can't stay the same, but this proposal, you know, it's this porridge is too cold and this porridge is too hot. But I don't know what the solution is other than something that maybe simplifies it, but I appreciate your comments.
Is there any other questions? Mayor Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just because I mentioned in the recommendation to meet with or to gather information, I just want it to be known that I have had 2 meetings with our MP already about this, and as recently as last night, I've sent an email to our MPP and our MP with including mayors, just for feedback on the whole thing. So although this won't be done until tonight, it has been started, and it's certainly rolling out quickly. It's all very time sensitive to the 25th of this month. So.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, just to confirm, I noted in the report that I requested or noted the concern that municipal councils will not have had a chance to ratify a decision before the comments are due and the request for representations. I can confirm I did get a polite, we have a mandate. Please submit your comments by September 25th. So I can confirm that.
So do we have some more questions? Okay, Councillor Gatward, then Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the disappointing part of this proposal is the fact that currently our provincial boundaries that have divvied up the county to the north, the west, and the main chunk do not even match what they're proposing federally. So we've got different provincial boundaries, different federal boundaries, and they want people to vote. But I think this will make it so confusing for our residents. And they're going to say, we vote for Oxford? Why is that when we're connected to Brantford? And the people in the east, they were left in Brantford and they're connected to Haldeman. So I certainly have my own comments that I'm going to forward to our MP and to the commission. I know that it's a difficult job, but they just arbitrarily, in my opinion, drew lines to try and make it fit within the puzzle. And to me, that is not right. The residents deserve better. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just heard two members of council refer to our MP. Well, your MP is not my MP. I'm in Oxford riding already, and I don't mind it too much. I vote in Norwich rather than Burford or Brantford, but the issue here, I think, is population, of course, and Mark makes a good point where I believe it should be divided, the city should be divided to keep the communities of interest, which is the second factor, intact. Paris has no interest with Tilsonburg. I would be not the only person to realize that, and that's what's happening. So if you look at it in terms of communities of interest and population combined, our combined MPs may be able to come up with a better solution than what is here. So I suggest that any communication with your MP communicate as well with my MP, and perhaps I don't know whether John's in Brant or the Cambridge riding, but communicate with that MP as well. So again, it's not just your MP, it's our MPs that we have to communicate with.
Mayor Bentley.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe we CC'd your MP, sorry.
CC'd, or did you CC your MP?
No, I sent it to my MP and CC'd your MP, I'm sure.
Maybe I'll send to my MP and CC your MP.
Whatever gets you through the night, Councillor Chambers.
Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments?
I think Councillor Bell is raising his hand.
Councillor Bell. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Adam, and I think perhaps to Mayor Bailey, because it's really he's represented in this motion. Are we looking to give guidance to the mayor as a collective view of council as to which we would prefer, as to whether we accept what is being proposed or whether we have a preferred alternative?
Through you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think I heard most. Excuse me. I think I heard most of your questions, so I'll try and answer it. You know, I think what we're trying to accomplish. You know, I think what I've recommended here is trying to provide a general approach to say, please don't arbitrarily split these boundaries. You know, you're going to have some deviation from the quota, and these are our. I think we can. You know, assess these are our communities of interest, and we probably would like to minimize the amount of overlap in terms of the overall structure. The one thing I did want to note too about the provincial boundaries is they will be effectively changed for the 2026 election from this proposal. So there is some impetus to ensure that they match, or, you know, the provincial boundaries mirror the federal boundaries.
So if I might follow on, could perhaps you, Adam, or maybe it's the mayor, just articulate what he would put forward as the position? I'm trying to read it here. He's going to make representation on behalf of the council of the county of Brampton. So what will be said? What will be our representation?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know. We haven't sat down and thought about that. Obviously, worked quite well with the mayor to ensure that it reflects this. You know, I think the timelines really aren't great. You know, trying to gain a sense of committee's consensus, knowing full well that council won't have the opportunity to ratify this before, if it's a written comment, then it has to be in before the Sunday. An option is available that I could submit a request for an actual in-person hearing representation, and that would be after council would have an opportunity. So if council wished to get into the nuts and bolts of this to ensure that it has a position, or if there's areas it wishes to see in certain areas, then that's something to be considered. It just wouldn't be through the point of a written submission.
Yeah, I'm just looking for clarity on the articulation of what that position is that the mayor will represent to this body. And I saw that online today, Larry Brock is going to be a party to this meeting, and I think it's 3 weeks from now or 2 weeks from now. So I'm anxious that we all are clear on what it is that we are being supportive of and what we are being unsupportive of.
Through you, Mr. So I think that the idea with this is just to be very, I hate for lack of a better term, vague. Just to say, if you're going to do this, these are certain principles we wish you would approach how you reconstruct the ridings. So if there's a desire for a firmer proposal, by all means that can be presented and articulated. But I think at this point it would be a very general, principled response to the commission.
But if I may, Mr. Chair, one final comment. So just to be clear, Adam, the mayor will say we do not like what we are seeing as the proposal today. We would like to continue the discussion along the lines that we've talked about earlier.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Mayor Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just to clarify for Councillor Bell, it was one of the MPs that came to me explaining the process and how really they aren't asking us what we think. It's a third party that's making these decisions. It's certainly not Member Brock, and he's just as disillusioned by it all as we are. I think if there was a consensus as to what we're not happy with, is that we weren't involved. Neither was the government. It was a third party hired by the government to take the pressure off the government. And I believe that's what we would bring forward as our concerns. I mean, if we need to have a meeting or go in camera or talk about what the message should be word by word, then we could do that. But as I said, it's very time sensitive to the 25th. And Mr. Brock is very concerned because he has a lot to lose in the numbers of his constituency. So I would think right now our message just is we're not happy that we weren't consulted, and that really our MPs have nothing to do with changing it, and we're going to be dealt this deal, I believe, but that's the message going forward. I haven't talked to all the MPs, but I've talked to one quite a lot.
If I might, Mr. Chair, too. Typically there are multiple rounds of proposals as well. This is the initial proposal. I've seen some egregious proposals too, not to talk to personally, but the London, there's essentially the breakup of London Fanshawe, which is a pretty traditional riding, and adjoining parts of the city of London to St. Thomas and they call it a Rurbish riding. And, there's going to be some repercussions from representations made by others who are probably even more upset than this council seems to be. So, anyways, I just wanted to note that there will likely be another opportunity before a final commission report is presented.
Okay, any other comments? I was just going to say myself, I've been through this process before, and I think it is right that it is a third party. Otherwise, you see gerrymandering, like what happens in the state. So at one point, they wanted to add St. George onto Hamilton. And so by gathering people together and the MPs and everything, we were actually able to change that. So this isn't fixed in stone by any means. So if we come up with some suggestions with other viable options, they do listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, we do have a mover or a second. If we don't have any other comments, call the vote. All those in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Seeing none, pass. Okay, RPT 031222, Energy Management Plan Update. Adam Crozier, you're up again. So we do have a recommendation. Do we have a mover and a seconder for this? Moved by Councilor Ferry, second by Councilor Wheat. Do we have any questions for Adam? I think you're getting off light this time. So seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, passed. 8.1, RPT 26722, small scale on-farm business sub. Oh,
8.7.
Yeah, I switched. Sorry about that. RPT 027222, North End Paris Fire Station. And we do have a recommendation there, moved by Councillor Howes, second by Councillor Coleman. Any questions? Councillor Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Cindy. This is great news. A lot of people in the north part of Paris are going to be very happy to see this moving forward. And this location seems to make a lot of sense, and I appreciate the fact that being land that the county already owns, it's going to reduce the cost. So that's all good news. My question's about the excuse me, the logistics and the timing of this project compared to the downtown road work that we know needs to happen in the near future and the Grand River Street North road work that we know needs to happen in the future. Can you illustrate for us a little bit how the sequential approach to this, which comes first? Thank you.
Through the chair. That's a great question. And we've been working with operations to talk about the logistics of this project to try and mitigate any issues that are happening with the road work. And I may turn this question over to Mr. Walton to speak further to that.
Thank you, Cindy. Through the chair to Councillor Howes. So the most important phase of the project, which would impact the fire hall once it's in service, is the deep sewer on Grand River Street North and the roundabout at Scott Street. So the plan that we're holding out right now is actually to construct those starting next year in 2023, ahead of the fire station being started. And then the fire station construction, we're hoping, did not say in the report, for it to be constructed by the end of 2024, in operation by the end of 2024. So clearly on Grand River Street North, there will be other projects which go on. That project's going to go on over probably a 7 to 10 year scope to finish it all. So there will be projects, but we have to make responses to lots of emergencies through construction projects, and that'll all be planned as part of those projects. But initially, the big thing is to get that deep sewer done, because that's a very deep and intrusive construction, and that roundabout, so that we aren't blocking it basically right at its front door. So that is the plan.
Well, Mr. Chair, through you, thank you, Rob. And Cindy. So if I could make a suggestion, as we move forward with these projects, again, leaning on our communications department, I know residents of the north part of Paris, Ward 2, have observed the street work on Market Street, where there's a 35-foot hole being worked on, and they would certainly, if they're envisioning that in sections of Grand River Street North, they would have some concerns about the fire service from its existing location, being able to make it in a timely fashion to the north parts of Paris. So I think it would be important as we move forward, if it's not possible to have the new North Fire Hall in place before we start digging up the main road through town, please, if we can take steps to communicate very clearly to people all of the measures that we're taking to make sure that there's no decrease in the timing, the critical timing of fire service from the existing station up to North Paris. Please, thank you.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you. I'm also very happy that this is coming into play at this time, and based on the recommendation we received, I believe, 2 years ago, and we've been working through. My question is more for the fire service, and it's more about deployment and recruitment. Just looking at this, and it's easy to kind of say, like, this could be considered almost the Ward 2 fire station, although it will also serve Ward 1 often as well. But looking at having the sort of south end and north end fire stations, do we look at our recruitment in a way of looking at people who are based more in one zone or another? And when the deployment piece happens and we have two active, can you just speak a little bit about how that works to make sure that we get, especially if there's a traffic bottleneck, we get folks from the north end who are going to be serving the north fire hall? Because unlike some of the other fire halls, that bottleneck of traffic piece could be an issue for a couple of years, as Councillor Howes was saying, especially with the road work that is ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We look at that through recruitment every year, where people live and they work, because we consider daytime response as well. So there's a lot of time people are at home and they can respond quite easily, but it's a daytime response, which is also a busier time to get through the downtown core. So we do look at that. And our last recruitment, we did look at where people lived and worked, and we brought on some additional staff for the Paris station in planning for the North End station.
Wonderful. And my next question is probably for Cindy, through you, Mr. Chair. Cindy, I know that the south end, or I guess we'll call it the South Paris fire station now, I know that the community rooms have been used there. I know that we've had things like water open houses and other things where we're able to put all the boards out. Can you talk a little bit about how that aspect will be in service to folks in the north end? Or is that a possibility when we look at some of that sort of community development that happens at our current fire station? Would that also be extending to this one?
Through the chair. So if we proceed with this, we'll be looking at the design for the new station. At this point, we've been looking at a similar footprint to the 3 stations that we just built. But if there's some desire by council to, extend beyond that and create some type of community room, we could incorporate that into the design as well, if that's desired.
Yeah, I know it's a silly thing, but when Sobeys stopped offering up a space for people to meet up in that end, it actually was an issue of where to meet and when to meet and how to meet. And there's some room downtown for sure, but as that area builds up, sometimes having an option in the north end for community groups, for Lions clubs and other groups to meet and to do some community pieces. So I think about the park opening we just had up there and how wonderful that was. That shows me the need is there and the desire is probably there for some sort of community room up in that north end as well. So I would be very supportive and hope that whoever's on council next term would be supportive of that in the design. So thank you.
Joan, you had a question, Councillor Gatward.
Yeah, I think it's been partially answered, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask if this hall would be built similar to the three we just built, and Cindy has said that that's what they would look at. And certainly the firemen in those stations do have community gatherings, and they open up their doors and move the trucks outside and have fire prevention week inside the hall, and maybe a barbecue out in the parking lot to raise some funds for their station. And so I'm certainly supportive of having the same standard as the other three halls. And I'm glad that we can use this piece of property without affecting the wellhead. And it will be a good project for the north end of the town, which is still growing. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Wee.
This isn't a question, it's a comment. It's not about the north end of Paris. It's about that area of the county. There's a lot of rural area up there too. And when you look down the road, perhaps you redesign and take some St. George area, Station 7 area away, particularly Glen Morris, that might get served quicker here. This is about the county of Brant. It's not about Paris. It's about the county of Brant.
That was a comment that I actually got from quite a few of my constituents when I've been out walking, and when I brought that up, that the ward will be better served through this fire department to the north as well. So I'm sure you'll be looking at that, how that affects us, and how we'll be working with the air fire department, I believe, that currently serves that area. So I was told that the fire department has never failed to save a foundation yet. So. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, we'll call the vote then. All those in favor? Okay, passed. That brings the end to that section. We have communications. Do we have any communications? No communications. Chief Administration Officers, Michael Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of things I wanted to touch base on. Usually I take an opportunity every couple of months to just provide a few updates to a committee on paramedic services, because most of their business goes to paramedic services committee, which all members are not part of. So I thought it was worth noting that Chief King and Deputy Chief Robinson and I met with staff of the Brant Community Healthcare System this morning, and we had a very actually positive discussion. We are meeting every few months to talk about how to clear ambulances out of the Brantford General Hospital. I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that there's a broader healthcare crisis going on. It was talked quite openly about at Paramedic Services Committee, but I think locally, I'm quite confident in saying that we are doing everything we can to try to do what we can locally to keep ambulances not and our paramedics not at emergency and out in the community where they can do a lot of good. So I won't get into the details. It's quite technical, and certainly the rapport between the staff of the general and our paramedic team was strong, and I think they have a number of solutions that they're either actively implementing or working on implementing. And noting there is some regulatory change that has to take place to make some of the bigger stretch goals that we've got to come into place. But and I think it is really worth commenting to just give credit to our paramedics through these difficult times. It has been quite the summer that we've been through in the healthcare system, and I think they continue to show resilience and creativity to get through their work every day. So, on that note, I also want to mention the Paramedic Services Committee did meet last Monday, and they did approve a budget that was presented back in early August, and we're confident that budget will help us address with some resourcing needs. Council will be seeing that report at their next meeting. The last thing I wanted to mention before I make just a final comment is that the Transportation Master Plan, which has been an ongoing and fairly substantive initiative will be coming directly to council this month. Staff are trying to take as much time as they have available to them to make final changes and updates to that document, because it will provide a pathway forward for some fairly major initiatives over the next several years. So it will be coming directly to council. Our consultant will be here for the presentation, and then there'll be a staff report with the transportation master plan attached. So, Mr. Chair, before I close, this is the last Chief Administrative Officer's report of the term, and so I did want to, just as I did at the end of the last term and my predecessor did, just to take this opportunity to thank council on behalf of staff for your tolerance and your support and your advice and guidance over the course of the term. You know, I think this term started off like we saw a path that was outlined in our strategic plan, and then it took a bit of a right turn as the pandemic hit us, and we kind of worked through 2 years of very unexpected and very unprecedented situations. And I think as a team, we got through that very well. So I just want to take that opportunity to again extend our thanks on behalf of staff to council while I have this opportunity. And we look forward to the upcoming term and the things that we can collectively achieve during that time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for that comment. We very much appreciate with the work the staff have done as well. Do we have other business? Reasonable apprehension of bias. Councillor Chambers.
It's not as bad as it sounds, Mr. Chairman. This won't take long. I just wanted to make a few comments, if I might. And I'm going to begin by saying that I'm going to state the obvious, that official proceedings in which decisions are made must be carried out in a fair and impartial manner. Nobody will argue with that. That's just the way it is, and that's common law. The corollary of that is that decisions that are made in official proceedings may be disqualified if the proceeding is deemed to be impartial and unfair. It's just the way it is. So I'm going to give 3 examples of that and then make a conclusion at the end. The first example is, if you can think of, we've all seen them on TV, a trial in a court of law. Now imagine if during that trial, before all the evidence is heard, one of the jurors stands up and exclaims that, I've made up my mind, I'm going to support the crown, I guess I'll say. And this is before the trial is over. Now, a reasonable person might assume that that juror is biased at that point, which is a reasonable apprehension of bias, and that's one of the tests of a fair proceedings. So if a juror did that, you can imagine what would happen. It would probably be disqualified, and maybe a mistrial would be called. That's in a trial in a court of law, very formal. Second example is an appeal heard at the Ontario Land Tribunal. Now just assume for a minute if someone appealed a county decision and it was being heard at the Ontario Land Tribunal, and before the county had a chance to present its position, the panel member declared that he's going to support the appeal. Again, a reasonable person might assume that that panel member would be biased because he's not even going to listen to the county position. I don't think that's ever happened, but if it did, that hearing would not be that fair, I wouldn't think. The third example is a public hearing conducted by the Planning Committee at a planning meeting pursuant to the Planning Act. Now just assume that before all the input was heard, a member of the committee exclaimed that he was going to support the proposal. It's a good proposal, without having heard all of the public input. Or he could say that I'm not going to support that proposal, even though he hasn't heard the entire input. I would submit that that hearing would not be that fair, because that person would probably be showing his bias. Now, think back to last week's planning committee meeting. If you look at the tape, that very thing didn't happen once. It didn't happen twice. It happened 10 times by 6 different members of the committee in 5 of the public hearings. And I would submit that, I'll say no harm, no foul, but in my time, I can recall being on a planning committee meeting, or planning committee, where that very thing happened. The recommendation that went to council was appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board at that time based on reasonable apprehension of bias. You're not supposed to make your decision until you've heard all of the evidence. So keep that in mind. I would think that if last week's meeting was the first planning committee meeting that people were at, some leeway may be given. But this was the last planning committee meeting of the term. We should know better. So I'm going to ask that staff present in the orientation of the next council a little prep on reasonable apprehension of bias and perhaps a procedural conduct bylaw for public hearings pursuant to the Planning Act. It's just my suggestion.
Mayor Bailey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Chambers, you're absolutely right, and I was part of that. I remember actually saying, I actually congratulated someone on something before it was voted on, as something I thought was a good idea. And before I did that, I remember a couple of councillors saying that this is great and good for you, and it's nice to hear, and things like that. But I mean, I actually congratulated someone on their plan before we took the vote. So I saw myself caught up in it, and when I said it, I knew that I was part of it. I didn't instigate it, but I certainly contributed to it, and it seemed wrong when I said it, and it seemed wrong as the meeting proceeded because other people said similar things after I did. So Councillor Chambers, you're absolutely right. It didn't seem right when it was happening, and I think when you look back on the tapes, you'll see that there was some before my comment. My comment was blatantly wrong because I did congratulate someone before I voted. And then there was a couple of other comments that shouldn't have been said after mine, but the whole meeting, if it were in court, would be thrown out.
Councillor Chambers.
Perhaps I could just sum that up, Mr. Chairman. When I put down reasonable apprehension of bias, I wanted to have a good definition for that, and I Googled it and looked it up on Wikipedia. And the first paragraph says this: "This article may be too technical for most readers to understand." So I stopped there, and I'll let you guys determine from a legal aspect what reasonable apprehension of bias is, because it is complicated and it is not as easy as it sounds. But I appreciate the mayor saying that, because we all have to be careful. It's not up to the chairman to police that. It's not up to me to stand and give points of orders. It's up to everybody to know how fair, impartial hearings are conducted, and we all need to be reminded once in a while, I hope. And I've said that respectfully to all the members of the committee.
No, it's much appreciated, and it's a good reminder for all of us. So is there any other comments or questions in regards? Okay. Oh, Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Councillor Chambers for bringing this forward. I think there is a further level of thought that we need here, and that is that I think we all naturally have biases, And I think it's beyond just the statement of potential bias that we might make in our enthusiasm in a planning meeting or any other meeting for that matter. It goes further. We really have to be open-minded as we go into every decision that comes to council. And for the life of me, I cannot believe that will be done easily, because we're all subject to all kinds of inputs from residents, from our own experiences. It is a constant challenge, and I think it is something that is well worth bringing up at the inauguration or pre-inauguration of the next council. The more we can be open-minded, the more we can challenge each other on the basis of the evidence that brought to us at the table, the better the decisions we will make as we go forward. So, Councillor Chambers, thank you.
Councillor Laferriere.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just want to add to that. That is good to remember, especially because it is a hearing as opposed to something else. But I kind of want to, if this ends the conversation, great. If not, that's fine too. But if it does end it, I kind of want to bring up something I think is really positive on this council related to it. I know we're all apologizing, and there was some missteps definitely at that meeting. But one of the things I really have appreciated about this council in this regard specifically is you'll hear from other councils and people who are on other councils who will say, so how are you voting? Who's voting for what next month? And on this council, I truly honestly don't know. Right? There isn't pacts and alliances. There hasn't been no vote trading. People advocate for a position. And, I know some people maybe are closer than others and this and that, but, ward mates and people who've been together on this council for 20, 30 years, they don't all vote the same all the time. People who are very aligned in many other ways will, not vote that way or a certain way. Over and over again, I've had, especially when sort of member motions have come up, for lack of a better term, people say, well, what votes do you have and who's getting what? And that I know on other councils there are sort of alliances and allegiances, and people talk about them pretty openly. And on this council, I never know. I never know who's voting for what. There's no, there's not like a veterans group and a new group. There's not a Paris group and a non-Paris group, despite, earlier comments. There are things that happen all the time on this council, and I'm always surprised at who votes for what and how. And I think that is actually a point of pride that this council should have, though we do still misstep sometimes. But I think that's really interesting. I think it's really ethical. There have been times where I've assumed certain votes would happen a certain way, and I'm never right. So I appreciate being never right and not being able to predict, and that sort of horse trading doesn't happen at this table. I think that's a positive thing to make sure to mention.
Thank you for those comments. Do we have any other comments? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just off the topic, not to Robert's points. To the CAO, since you're bringing the master transportation plan forward at the next council meeting, is there a will by the staff that we have an earlier council meeting with the amount of stuff that could be on the agenda for that?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, we don't see it as being a tremendously long meeting. I mean, there's lots on the agenda, but I don't believe we don't have, other than that, I think there's a couple of other staff reports we might be trying to push through, but we don't see it as stretching beyond what I would call a normal meeting. I could be wrong, but at this point, we think it'll wrap up under our normal times.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And I don't believe we have any in camera, so I guess there won't be a next meeting for this group till after the election. So thank you for allowing me the honor of chairing this committee. And we'll talk to you next week. Councillor Weed. Okay. We are adjourned.